Fair use. Federal law allows citizens to reproduce, distribute, or exhibit portions of copyrighted motion pictures, videotapes, or video discs under certain circumstances without authorization of the copyright holder. This is called fair use and is allowed for purposes of criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody, which doesn't infringe of copyright under 17 U.S.C. 107.
O Yahweh, Kuma, Yahweh, Wayafuto O Yazeasa, Wayanusa Misanecha Bitunecha. Arise of you, O Yahweh. Let your enemies be scattered, and let those that hate thee flee from before thee. Give him thanks by saying Hallelujah.
All right, shalom family, and welcome to Into All Truth. May the Ruach HaKodesh lead you into all truth and show you things to come, and may the seed of Yahuwah's word be planted in your heart in good ground to bring forth the fruit of righteousness. In the name of Yahushua HaMashiach, I pray. Amanah. Shalom family. So welcome to the Prester John series part 2. In part 1, you can go and take a look at it. We proved the location of Eden and its 5 rivers and the lots of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, which we will prove today locate all the lands of Ethiopia, all 3. And we also proved the 0 degrees north equator is where Jerusalem is, and that the Nile of today was once known as the Jordan. And it was the central 0-point meridian of the earth from antiquity. In part 1, we began to prove that Edom actually is Prester John through the ages. From the mixing with the Assyrians, the Canaanites, and other nations, he is Prester John even to Pope John the Khan of today. We will see how he and a confederacy mixed with the Ethiopians and stole their identity because Esau was prophesied to usurp Jacob and, according to 2nd Esdras, become the end of the world. And indeed, John Ogilvy's book on Africa proves his lands were factually known. Again, Daniel 11 and 14 says also the spoilers, other translations say robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, and they shall fall, says the Septuagint, right? And so Prester John titled himself Solomon or David and sought to change timelines and seasons in order to establish himself as the Solomon or King Priest, Lord of Lords of the earth. In the last series, we outlined that the true Ethiopians were the descendants of Abraham and Jacob, grafted in threefold. These are the sons of Abraham and Ketura, inclusive of Midian, whose son Jethro and daughter Zipporah were grafted into the line of Moses, and Menelek, the son of Solomon and Sheba. And we're going to discover more ways that they were grafted in part 3, all right, which will take a few weeks. So let's now begin by making a distinction between the good and bad seed of the earth, because even Nebaioth, the first son of Ishmael, was even among the Ethiopians and has a promise of being a good seed at the very end. All right, Pam, so it's important that we understand, we're not going to go into it in too much detail here, but that there are friends of Israel and friends of Yah among the true Ethiopians, and then there are enemies among what is called the Confederacy that conspired against Israel. And so the friends of Israel in Ezekiel 38, Isaiah 60 and 6, and Isaiah 60 and 7, these are among those who are the friends of Israel. And so it says Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish, and all the young lions thereof. This is a prophetic scripture regarding when Gog and Magog actually comes up against Yasharal when they're back in the land. And these say, are you come to take a spoil? Because this group is allied with Yasharal, and I believe these are Sheba and Dedan, the half-Shemitic Cushites, right? Ethiopians. Also here in Isaiah, it says, all they from Sheba shall come, and they shall bring gold and incense, and they shall show forth the praises of Yahuwah. The multitude of camels shall cover thee, the dromedaries of Midian and Ephah. So Midian and Ephah are two of the sons of Ketura and Abraham. All right. And then Isaiah 7, the next verse says, and all the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered together unto thee. The rams of Nebaioth shall minister unto thee, and they shall come up with acceptance on mine altar, and I will glorify the house of my glory. So Nebaioth is the eldest son of Ishmael, and Kedar is also one of his sons, who we talked about. The black tents of Kedar are often mentioned in relation to the Shunammite daughter of Issachar, who is the great love of Solomon in Song of Solomon. Her skin is black like the tents of Kedar, and these are the Shemitic descendants of Abraham. These are the enemies of Israel, the confederacy of the crafty council. All right. And so these are not Ethiopians, nor the eldest son of Ishmael or Sheba and Dedan and Yavan, who are cited as friends. In Psalm 83, these are the crafty council. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. Remember, Israel, true Israel, has been hidden all this time. And they have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel will be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent, and they were confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, the Ishmaelites, so not Nebaioth, right, of Moab, and the Hagarenes, so those are the sons of Hagar, whom she had after Abraham, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek. Now we're going to see Amalek took over the identity of the Ethiopians. The Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. Ashur also is joined with them, and they have helped the children of Lot. So the Moabites are children of Lot, but there are other children of Lot relating to the Ammonites, etc. So, and Ashur has joined in with them. So this is what I mean. Esau really mixed in with Ashur. So you're always seeing the word Esau, Ashur, Edom, Ashur, Tiglath-Pileser, the Assyrians. So Edom really took them over. And so it's important that we understand that as we go through this study. Now we are again going to prove the lands of Shem and the land of Israel according to the areas where the Ethiopians, the Edomites, and the Confederacy were placed in relation to the true land and how they interloped into it to take the identity of Israel. I want to bring up the very important meridian of Markhor because I want you to understand this boundary line. It's very important that you understand this western boundary line. And this is in the book One Primeval Language. And this meridian of Markhor, I located it here. And this is really the border of the land of Shem. This is why the highest mountains in the world are here. This is where the ark was deposited after the flood, and everyone went down into the land. They went into the east, it says. And Babylon is in the east. The land of Aram is in the east. The land of Shem is in the east, and they first settled there. All right, so the meridian of Markhor. Now, I've already explained to you that Kor in Hebrew means west. And so here is the location of the meridian of Markhor. It's located right along this line. And of course, this is where the Tibetan mountains are, the highest mountains in the world, where the ark landed. So this is referring to the 10 tribes when they were scattered, and the sun-black tribe of Manasseh, the direction that they were living in, the scattered Israelites. Let us follow then Mr. Elphinstone's further descriptions. There is no marked limit between Abuistande and the country west of the meridian of Markhor. The latter, however, has a western inclination. It is included between the Parapism Mountains and the range of Koya Amuron, and may be divided into the valley of the Urgison, that of the Turnuk, and the high country between those rivers. Why am I saying this? Because it's near Abu Stande. So this could be Afghanistan or Istanbul, right? Wherever it was. And it's in some mountains, and it says in the range of Koya Amuron. So Amuron is going to refer to the Edomites, and Korah to the west. And some of the Edomites and some of the Edomites were named Korah. Okay, just so you know that. Now, they were on the easternmost boundary of the land of Shem, right? And so right next to that boundary line is the west. So Kor means west, basically means adjacent to the west. And what it's saying here is that it is a high country between those rivers. Between those rivers. So the two main rivers in this region would be the Euphrates, where the Euphrates dumps off into the Indian Ocean, and the other one would be where the Hiddekel dumps off between the Indian Ocean. So you see the confluence of designating this extreme eastern boundary of the land of the Edomites, the land of Shem, and the place where the ark landed clearly tells us this is called the meridian of Markur. So, or Mokur. And Kur means west. And so it says there's no marked limit between Abistag and the country west of the meridian of Markur, because they were corrupt. All right? And you see it as an open land. So because the lands of Babylon and the wicked are broad. Okay? Whereas the lands of Israel have mountains. All right? And so this is how we know this was officially the outer eastern boundary, western boundary of the land of Shem, adjacent to the land of Ham. All right, I hope that makes sense as we get into this portion of the study. And see, the other part of it here says that this river is the greatest of the Khorasan rivers. Remember, I mentioned to you already the Yangtze River. So Korah means west, Khorasan, so that could be Shem, or it could be Sinim, the Chinese, the Canaan. All right? Or it could be referring to both Korah and San. All right? But it's the greatest of the Khorasan rivers. So this would be the great Hiddekel River, and or the great river Euphrates region, right? So you see the correlations here? I hope that makes sense. So here's a map of the world from 1873, and also refers to Ptolemy's age. And this was what they they limited to the scope of the world for their big cover-up. But we have to turn it because originally south was up and north was down. And I want to show you that, in fact, the rivers that I have talked about coming out of the Jordan, aka the Nile, and leading up into the Black and Caspian Seas, in fact, existed before but are hidden now. When we look at it the way we normally look at the world map, all the letters, the words are upside down. So that means the north was considered lower and the bottom, and waters flow down north. All right? So let's take a look at this map online as it is. And this was Ptolemy's concept of the world and understanding. So when you go online and research, they say, no, this was never the river routes. But what the AI, I used DeepSeek. What DeepSeek showed me was it said, well, how about I refer you to a whole bunch of maps that do show the river route you're looking for? But they're just myth and legend. So this is just myth and legend according to DeepSeek and the internet. But of course, these are all maps. Again, I think most of the maps I show you guys all the times are maps I've shown you before. From like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, almost every single map. But let's take a look at this. So let's zoom in. First, I want to show you, this is the Mediterranean on the right. This is Africa. Up south here, see it's saying Ethiopia, even all the way down to the south here, right? Ethiopia, saying Africa in here, saying Arabia in here, and then Persia begins here. Now this would be India, all right? This is India here, what they call so-called India. Media Persia. So look at Media Persia is taking up a lot. It's saying Asia here, but Asia is actually Africa. Africa is Asia, but that's a whole other discussion. I don't want to get into it. So what we're trying to look for here is the Black Sea or Mar Negro. See, look, it says Mar Moro. So the Moors, as in the Black Moors, all right? And notice here, there is a waterway going all the way here, through here, into the Caspian Sea. See, so they're connected. They understood them as being connected in the past. And look at these high, high, high stone hills that connected them in the past. So they've done a lot of changing of the lands. All right, and Mar Moro and Mar Caspiv. And so, let's zoom out a bit. We're going to see, obviously my speculation was that the Nile begins way down here, and look at the rivers are very similar. We're seeing kind of here at the very bottom is the beginnings of the Nile in this area, as I've said before. And it's called Mauritania. We've got the main river. This would be the Gihon River heading to the west. All right. And they don't seem to, I can't see a name for it. If you see a name, just put it in the chat. Or on the leaderboard. But anyway, it's going back into this land, and look at this huge column. What's this big column? It looks like there's some kind of a kingdom here, surrounded by water on top of a mountain. Barbarak. All right, and so that is, if we're calling this the Nile, this would be west of the Nile. This is basically the Congo. All right, there's some huge palaces in this area. Look at them all. Africa, Ethiopia. Look at them. Look at the number of castles and palaces. Abyssinia. Look at them all. Look at them all. Just tons of palaces. Tons of palaces all the way down to South Africa. And these people, and it says it's all saying Ethiopia or Abbasia. So Abba is the name of his father's title, right? Abba, Sia. So that would be, this would be like two summits, and this would be, they have the I, but that would be probably a yod. Abbasia. So his name is all over it. But look at how many kingdoms and palaces were here. Okay, Nubia. All right, so those are the black people, Nubian, right? Nabu. Nabu means prophet. And so here we see the Nile going all the way up all the way up. Look at all these kingdoms. Look at all these castles. All the way into the Mediterranean. Ma Egyptium. And look, Libya is still here, which I believe that's Laban's land. I would love to go into more detail, but I've got to do this video for you. So I can't indulge myself. But we're seeing the Nile is going into the Mediterranean. And of course, we're seeing that there are still waterways. This is a major one right here, leading into Mar Moro. Now, Mor means light, reflecting the light, but it's also a color. It's a skin color, maroon, which is the red color of red soil, and the color of the Hebrews, which is a reddish hue to the skin. Of course, some Hebrews are caramel colored and some are dark black chocolate. All right, and those are all the colors of amber. Amber resin comes in those three colors. Maybe we should zoom out a bit. And notice, remember what I said about the Great River Euphrates. There it is, going out of the Black Sea and into the Atlantic or Ethiopic or Egyptian Sea, as it is called, the Egyptian Sea in the Book of Jubilees. And remember, the Book of Jubilees was had by the Ethiopians from the beginning up to 3,000 years ago. All right. Again, the Gentiles and Greeks tend to say, oh, they discovered it in the 1700s and they were descendants of the Ethiopians, and that was when it was first discovered. No, that's when they discovered it. The Ethiopians had it since the time of Solomon because it was written by Moses. So here we have it going into the Black Sea, and we have, of course, the Nile going to the Black Sea, and then we have the Black Sea going over into the Caspian Sea. Water is flowing down north from the top of Africa. So water is coming into these great seas, and the Caspian Sea is supposed to be the biggest lake on the planet. I guess the Black Sea must be number 2 or 3 at least. But we see there would be the Great River Euphrates, which flows into the west and into Canada. And these two seas are interlinked. And then, as I said, we see these great waterways coming out of the Black and Caspian Sea. 2 to 3 of them, right? So we see coming out of the Caspian, we see here. And this is going to be the Hiddekel. All right, so if this is India, all right, this is the Hiddekel dumping off into the Indian Ocean over here from India. Okay, like from the Caspian down through India and into the water. And it's also the Yangtze, which goes all the way across Asia and into the water, as I've said before. All right, this is on all of these maps, what Yah showed me. All right. And we have, of course, going out of the Black and Caspian Sea, we have these waterways. The Euphrates is likely this one. Okay. Euphrates is likely here. Why do I say that? Because Gad's land was below the Caspian Sea. And it wasn't beyond the Euphrates. So it would have been in this range. So this would have had to be perhaps the Tina, not sure. But long story short, if this was really just one river, from these 2 rivers, it's really just one river that has 2 splits in it. This would be the Euphrates, all right? So this would still allow Gad's land to be around here. How do we know this is the land of Gad? Because Yahushua HaMashiach did most of his miracles around the Sea of Galilee, which was in the land of Gad. And so let's prove that. How do we know? How did the Sea of Galilee get its name? Well, you can go to this artsbox.com, or you can just, go to any Bible dictionary. It'll tell you the same information. The name originates from the Hebrew word kenor, okay? Meaning harp or lyre, which resembles the shape of the lake called the Sea of Galilee, all right? And so what we're pointing at is the Caspian Sea clearly here, right? And you see it does look like a guitar or a kora instrument, okay? The kora instrument looks the same and it has the 10 strings down it, all right? The Sea of Galilee is of great significance to the way, in other words, the way of righteousness, walking the path of Yah, because Yahusha performed many of his miracles on his shore, such as walking on water and calming the storm and feeding 5,000 people. This is the largest lake in the world. In Numbers 34:2 says, command of the children of Israel, and say unto them, when you come to the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall unto you for an inheritance, even the land of Canaan with the coast thereof. Numbers 34:10, and you shall point out your east border from Hazaran to Shephan. Numbers 34:11, and the coast shall go down from Shepham to Riblah on the east of Ain, and the border shall descend and shall reach unto the sea of Shinnereth eastward, and the border shall go down to Jordan, and the goings out of it shall be at the salt sea, and this shall be your land with the coast thereof round about. This is how far the kingdom of Gad extended to, all right? And we see the harp. It was underneath and part of the Caspian Sea. I want you to be very clear. And again, the Nile is the Jordan, okay? The Nile is the Jordan, which we showed you in the last video. And so it's east of that. So the Sea of Galilee is also called Lake Kinneret, and is mentioned as belonging to the land of Gad in Joshua 13:24 and Numbers 34:11, Joshua 11:2. And Moses gave the inheritance unto the tribe of Gad, even unto the children of Gad, to their families. And in the valley Bethram and Beth Nimrah and Sukkoth and Zaphon, and the rest of the kingdom of Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Jordan and his brother, even unto the edge of the sea of Shinnereth, on the other side of the Jordan eastward. This is the inheritance of the children of Gad and their families and their villages. All right? So for those of you who are still captured by the idea that, you know, this little piece of Israel, this little piece of land here is Israel, this clearly confirms again, as I keep confirming over and over again, because remember, Naphtali's land is near Tyre. So Tyre is in this region. When we look at the Lachish relief and we confirm the identity of Israel and the genetics of the people buried in those regions, the L1, 2, 3, the head shapes and everything, it still falls within the range of the land. The land is just much bigger than you think. All right? So you all don't need to worry about it. This land is still part of the land of Israel, this teeny tiny land. All right? And this land is currently called Armenia. And there's a point where Joshua takes northern Palestine. It says, and to the kings that were on the north of the mountains and the plain of the south of Chinnereth, and in the valley and in the border of the door on the west, it is to believe to be that Lake Chinnereth has been named after that body of water. How did the Sea of Galilee get its name? The lake Gennesareth or Chinnereth, this is the area where Yahusha visited and performed healing acts. A town called Naphtali was later changed to Gennesareth or Chinnereth, all right, which is Galilee, all right? Now Chinnereth sounds like China or Kinnerath, all right? And was also called the paradise of Galilee because of its fertility and beauty. Luke is also the only gospel that calls it a lake. So it was also called Lake Tiberias. Lake Tiberias was an important city in 70 AD, being spared by the Romans. It was made the capital of Jerusalem when it was destroyed. The name was later given to the lake. Today, the Sea of Galilee is called Lake Tiberias. So this is way back in the day that this is consulting from, okay? Some medieval European maps, for example, the Catalan Atlas, which I'm going to show you, speculated about a Caspian Persian Gulf link. All right, but no Islamic scholars described this before 1800. No Islamic scholars described this before 1800. But the curious thing is that there are 523 total dams between the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, damming up all the waters through here. All right, here's just some of them, but there's 523. So again, they're rerouting waterways that create borders and define lands. All right, they are literally, it's not a boundary stone, it's a water boundary that they are displacing. And once again, notice the connection between the Mar Negro and the Caspian Sea in this ancient map. This is when they were displacing the identity of Israel up into the lands of Japheth, for example, Persia, Tartaria, etc. And that's why they have those crazy timelines they talk about, and they say, oh, they added 1,000 years. No, they were just creating, they used this to try to displace the identity of Israel up into the identity of Japheth. And so after they captured the northern kingdom here, they started to say more so that this was Jerusalem, and now they've isolated it into this tiny little spot right here, which is more controllable for Ha-Satan and the enemies of Israel. All right, I hope that makes sense. And so here's the famous Catalan map, which actually does show waterways. This is a couple of them here. Those are two lakes going down into the Persian Gulf area and the Indian Ocean. There's another one here as well. All right, but this map is kind of hard to see, so I'll show you some other ones. All right, this is Ptolemy's world map. Again, look at how this is the Caspian Sea, and we're seeing this river going all the way down here and into this region. So this is going into the Indian Ocean out of the Persian Gulf, or maybe it's going in the other direction. I'm not sure. And then so this is the Hiddekel, possibly as well, going into the Indian Ocean. And so again, we see here, we see these waterways, all right, going all the way down here. This could be the Ganges, this the Euphrates, etc. All right. So we really can see very clearly that these are all what have been dammed up by the 523 dams. The land near Gad's land or Shem's land is called Aria. Aria, that means lion. So Shem, Israel were the lions. And see this map again. This is the real orientation of the map, because Africa was up, south was up, north was down. Because I believe Tyre is over here, which I've shown you guys in other maps. Here's the Caucasus Mountains. Here's the Caspian. Caucasus Mountains are here. So Tyre would have been over here. And look, this would be Gad's land. Okay? This would be Gad's land. And there's the Mer Nor, or Moor Sea. See, they call it the Moor Noir. Moor Noir. So the Moors Noir Sea. Okay. So if the land of Gad is here, below the Caspian Sea, then the Turks and everything are over here. So this is really, we have these Cushites mountains. Cushites mountains, the Euphrates would be here, and the Hiddekel would be here, or Tigris. Make sense? I hope so. Here's another map I've shown you guys a few times. Long story short, it's in that range. The Euphrates is beyond this region here, because Gad's land has to be around Persia and the Caspian. It has to be in here somewhere. So that means the Euphrates has to be beyond it because Abraham's land went all the way to the Euphrates. So on this ancient map, we also see a river here. So this might be the Euphrates here. Euphrates would be this squiggly river here that I just showed you. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. I hope you guys understand it. So as I said, there are 3 Ethiopias in what we call around the region of India and Persia today, in the region of Egypt, which then expanded out to all of sub-Saharan Africa, and finally South America. And they were known as either Ethiopia or Cush, or the Indias, or Havilah, all right? And they were also known as Abyssinia, but only the one in Central Africa was known as Abyssinia. Why is that? Because it was more so associated with the Ishmaelite rule in Africa. Because remember, the largest slave trade in Africa was the Arab slave trade in Africa. All right, so they took over the lands of the Israelites. So the 3 Ethiopias and the 3 Indias, Near East, Central Africa, and I guess we would actually say, it says Far East, but I would say Far West. So in the apocryphal book of St. Thomas, the apostle moves easily between Persia and India, starting roughly with the 5th century apocryphal writer, the pseudo-Abidius, who described the exploits of the apostles Thomas, Bartholomew, and Matthew in each of the 3 Indias. This latter concept became a standard one in the Middle Ages. One of the 3 Indias faced Ethiopia according to the pseudo-Adibus. The second faced Persia, and the third occupied the ends of the earth between the ocean and the realm of darkness. So that is the West. That is the West. All right? The 3 Ethiopias. Again, this is page 42 and 43, the same sample from Lost Tribes in the Promised Land from Ronald Saunders. Where then is this remarkable country? Our magnificence, writes Prester John, the Hun also, so he's a mixed multitude, dominates the 3 Indias and extends to farther India, where the body of St. Thomas the Apostle rests. It reaches through the desert towards the place of the rising of the sun and continues through the valley of deserted Babylon, close by the Tower of Babel. Now, I'm not sure that's Tower of Babel. I have a different theory on that. Go look at my video on Tower of Babel. But I think he's referring to Babylon, or he could be referring to the west side, because it is truly towards the west in the Azores, which I believe is Shinar, where the 3 parts of the Tower of Babel were. All right, so it could be either or. John tells us that his palace is in Susa, the ancient capital of Persia. All right, now that's also where Daniel the prophet was buried, right? But this also implied proximity to Ethiopia in the vague geographical imagination of medieval Europe. Why? Because Elam was next to Medo-Persia. As the centuries passed, the continental realm of the Prester John letter, clearly somewhat south of the original Tartar centers of the legend, was to be increasingly identified as Ethiopia. This confused geography has ancient honorable roots. The first verse of the book of Esther describes the realm of the Persian king Osiris, whose palace was also at Susa. That's where the apostle Thomas evangelized in towards India, and that's where the prophet Daniel's body is, his monument, as extending to India, even unto Ethiopia. So he says his kingdom, the kingdom of Medo-Persia, extends into India, which I believe is true Babylon, and it says even into Ethiopia. Well, that would include Ethiopia between the two. So is he talking about another Ethiopia, probably in the south? Now, there are maps that show that South America was called Peruvia, Peru, but that's really Persia. So when these kings ruled, they ruled the entire earth, including Solomon, all right? So Greek and Roman authors exhibit similar vagueness about a vast region encompassed by terms like India and Ethiopia. The latter, even in his narrowest sense, comprises a much larger area than the present-day Ethiopia, beginning just south of the first cataract of the Nile. All right, so regarding the realm of darkness, the third became especially fruitful for the geographical imagination as the region of untold islands, which is the plural term Indies. So this is where you're getting the word Indies from. Etymology shares the same roots. Thus, it came to rest for once and for all. So this is how the term India became applied to these lands. Notice it says from India even unto Ethiopia. It implies Prester John is not originally Ethiopian, yet his empire extends to it. It covers India and beyond that, Ethiopia. When we imagine the Prester began in Africa with the idea that Africa is the land of Abraham, we can see that this empire extended outward from Africa toward India and beyond, all right? So we can understand, family, when we look at these other maps, we see that there's intra-India and extra-India. So he was extending out towards China into Tartaria. But again, they're also calling South America India. All right, gets a little confusing. And these are all called Cush as well. I forgot to name that one. But we notice in this Babylon of Egypt, we discover, and I'll just briefly go over this because I've reviewed it in many of my teachings, that, the daughter of Potiphar was the daughter of a priest of On. And On is associated with Babylonian religions, obviously, and a lot of the priests were Shemites because his name was actually a Shemitic name, all right? But what is important to know here, skipping down, the Jones Dictionary of the Old Testament proper names On as the name of an Egyptian city. Encyclopedia Britannica 1771 says Cairo was known as On. So Cairo is Egypt today, the Egypt in Africa. All right. Babylon was an ancient city of Egypt that stood where Cairo is. Cairo is the land of Edom. All right. And this is what there is a reference in this book here to the Great Pyramid of Esau or Giza. All right. So Giza or Gehazi is the language of the Ethiopians, not Amharic, which is the language of the Tigrays, and then the Giza is the Coptic written Amharic, so they say. And of course, in Isaiah 19 and 18, it says there would be an altar in Egypt in a place called the city of Zedek, all right? Now, Zedek or Zadok was one of the priests of Aharon, all right? The high priests of Aaron. And those sons of Zadok were the most righteous priests of Aaron. And apparently they at one point resided in Egypt and then were eventually scattered to the west coast of Africa and are presently today the Ashanti tribe, Levitical tribe. All right? So according to Herodotus in A History of Ethiopia, page 2, India was also known as Eastern Ethiopia. It seems that certain classical historians and geographers called the whole region from Egypt to India, both countries inclusive, by the whole name of Ethiopia, and in consequence they regarded all the dark-skinned and black peoples who inhabited it as Ethiopians. History of Ethiopia, Volume 1 by Sir Wallace Budge notes Homer and Herodotus call all the people of Sudan, Egypt, and Arabia, Palestine, and Western Asia and India, the Ethiopians. This is the mixed multitude who mixed in with Shem. All right. So this would include, we'll talk about it in the next section, but this would include the Philistines. And the Philistines are Japheth, all right, mixed in with the Canaanites. But this would include the Medo-Persians, who were also mixed in with the Shemites. Herodotus wrote in his celebrated history that both the Western Ethiopians who lived in Africa and the Eastern Ethiopians who dwelled in India were black in complexion, but that the Africans had curly hair while the Indians were straight-haired. All right? The Aboriginal black inhabitants of India are generally referred to as the Dravidians, of whom more will be said as we proceed. Now, they weren't all straight-haired. Some of them were kinky-haired because originally, again, I say that was the land of Shem. And there's actually a scripture in the Bible, it's just too much to include it here, that says that they were cast out of the original Egypt in America and sent there into exile in what we call India today as a punishment from Yah. All right, what has happened before will happen again, though. All right, so Ephorus says that the Ethiopians were considered as occupying all the south coasts of both Asia and Africa, and adds that this is an ancient opinion of the Greeks. All right, so the Ethiopians were occupying the whole realm I described. Another classical historian who wrote about the Ethiopians was Strabo, from whom we quote the following: I assert that the ancient Greeks, in the same way as they classed all the northern nations with which they were familiar as Scythians, etc., I affirm they designated as Ethiopia the whole of the southern countries toward the ocean. Strabo adds that if moderns have confined the appellation Ethiopians to those only who dwell near Egypt, this must not be allowed to interfere with the meaning of the ancients. All right, is that understood? So he's just affirming what they're all saying. Ethiopia went all through all of those regions, and like I said, began to press into the land of China and Canaan, and this is how everyone got grafted in to the mixed multitude, and Ethiopia spread. All right, now I want to share something from the book called Ancient Geography of India to give you the idea and affirm the idea that India was the land of Shem, aside from what the rivers tell us, or rather in addition to what the rivers tell us. This is probably from the 1800s, around the time when Prester John was ruling in those areas as well, or at least Esau, Edom had extended there, as well as the Ishmaelites, page 105 through 7. Just before the end of the 3rd century, Mauryan kings must have come in contact with the Bactrian Greeks under Demetrius, son of Euthydemus, and in the early part of the following century, Taxila must have formed part of the Indian dominions of the Ilkhridites. In 1226 BC, it was wrested from the Greeks by the Indo-Scythian Sus, or Yars, with whom it remained for about 3/4 of the century, when it was conquered by the later Indo-Scythians of the Cushan tribe. So these are Cushites mixed with Scythians. So these are Indo-Europeans, all right? I hope that's making sense. Under the great Kahn'S, all right? So this is under the great Khan, okay? So it's a big Khan artist and big king. The great Kahn'S, notice how it sounds kind of Russian, Kahn'S, Assyrian Damis. Oops, he's an Assyrian, Esau. All right, whose narrative of the journey Philostratus professes to have followed in his life of Apollonius. His account is manifestly exaggerated in many particulars regarding the acts and sayings of the philosopher, but the descriptions of the places seem to be generally moderate and truthful, according to Philostratus Taxilia. Now, this is a city in what they call India today. So what I'm showing this to you for is because it says Taxilia was not unlike the ancient Ninus, all right? So it sounded like Nineveh, and was walled in the manner of other Greek towns. For Ninus or Nineveh, we must read Babylon. So this is confirming that this was Babylon, all right? So we're talking about the region of India, what they call India today. So for Ninus or Nineveh, we must read Babylon, as we have no description of the great Assyrian city, which was nearly destroyed 2 centuries before the time of Herodotus. So what are they saying? When Prester John is talking about the great tower of Babylon, he's talking about Nineveh, because there were many Babylons. There was the Assyrian Babylon and there was the Aramite Babylon over there in what we call India. And of course, India has incredible Babylonian imagery. And a lot of Afro people says that the great Assyrian city, Ninus or Nineveh, right, was destroyed nearly 2 centuries before the time of Herodotus. And we know from Citrus that it was the symmetry as well as the antiquity of Babylon that struck Alexander the Great. I think they're referring to Alexander the Great, and all who beheld it for the first time. If I conclude, therefore, that Taxalia must have reminded the Greeks of Babylon by its symmetry, as Philostratus goes on to say, the city was divided into narrow streets with great regularity. He mentions also a temple of the sun, which stood outside the walls, and a palace in which the usurper was besieged. All right? And so there's a famous Callista temple of Allura, one of the largest rock structure in the world that is in Babylon. Here's some images of it. The Assyrian Marsura, we can assume the Maya and Syrians were Shemitic. So what we're going to talk about right now is that the Hindu scriptures talk about a Maya or Mayasura, a great ancient king of the Asuras, or the Assyrians, and Rakasa. Mayasura was a very famous king, all right, who built a palace in the Pandavas. And he had befriended a Naga. So Naga means snake. And he lived with him in this kingdom along with his family. And they built a particular palace historically. And so this is Mayan Ram. Now the Maya, so you notice the word, M, but you see the word Ya in their name, all right? And really the Mayans were originally associated with the Shemitic Assyrians because that's the land of Shem. That's why they had the name Ya in their name. And Ram always refers to the Aramites who were descendants of Shem. So this place is called Mayan Ram, all right? And this is the famous Lion's Rock Temple. So a temple was built on the top of this huge Lion's Rock at the southern tip of India, marking the border of Babylon and the border of the land of Shem, the Aramites. All right, so this is at the foot of India. So this says certain places here in Sri Lanka are associated with people to places in the Ramayana, like Sitha Elia in Nawario Elia. But this is just folklore and has nothing to do with real history. But you have Elia in there, like Elijah. You also have Sitha for the Scythians. So this language in and of itself proves that these mixed multitudes were there and that this was really the land of Aram. Now, there was one point where the Assyrians attacked Elam in 600 BC, just after they had taken captive the 10 tribes. And these are images from the conquest of Elam. Now, Elam was, one of the sons of Shem, and they were conquered by the Neo-Assyrian Empire between 655 and 639 BC. Ashurbanipal's campaign against Elam is triumphantly recorded in this relief shown in the destruction of the city of Hamanayo. All right, and so you see these people clearly have afros, kinky curly hair, both the Assyrians and the Elamites. And so the current occupants of that land now are pretending to be Syrians, are of course Turks, right? They're not the real Tarshish. They're not Yavan or Madai, all right? And then the summary of the Elamites' king's conflict with the Assyrians, 675 to 653 BC. Urtak, king of Elam, was succeeded by his brother Kumban Kaldesh II, who raided Assyria. Urtak restored relations by returning stolen idols and allied with the Assyrian king Esarhaddon. All right, Esarhaddon. All right, so it sounds like Esau, sounds like Assyrian, in 674 BCE. Peace lasted until Esarhaddon's death, after which tensions rose with his successor Ashurbanipal, despite receiving the Assyrian aid during a famine. Urtak later attacked Babylonia with the Gambulu tribe, but died soon after. His brother Teman succeeded him, but was killed by Ashurbanipal in the Battle of Ulal River. So that's the famous battle, okay? A decisive Assyrian victory. Now, you notice they had Babylon, right? So they had set up Babylon before the Aramites, Nebuchadnezzar, set it up, because this is about 100 years before the Babylonian captivity. So you see how the Shemitic sons were worshiping Baal, right? All together, even Elam. And they literally stole their idols. So they were all worshiping Baal, all right? And I'm describing this battle because there was a shifting of territories, and Elam, as we said in the previous video, was the place to which the Ethiopians and the Ishmaelites scattered. Earlier Elamite Assyrian conflicts are listed here if you want to, go into them and pause to read, okay? They had sacked Babylon, stealing the law code, all right? And so that's not Torah, but that's the Babylonian law. All right, so Elam oscillated between alliances with Assyria, briefly rising as a power before succumbing to Assyrian dominance in 7th century BCE. So that's before Nebuchadnezzar reigned in that area, the Aramites. All right, so I hope that makes sense, but really it was the Assyrians who were most heavily practicing Babylonianism. Again, I mentioned that the prophet Daniel's tomb was said to be in the region of Ethiopia, and the Prester John letter says, should you desire to learn the greatness and excellency of our exaltedness and of the land subject to our scepter, then hear and believe. I, Prester John, he calls himself the Lord of Lords, Baal of Baals, surpass all under heaven in virtue, in riches, in power. 72 kings pay us tribute. In the 3 Indies our magnificence rules, and our land extends beyond India, where rests the body of the holy apostle Thomas, and it reaches towards the sunrise over the wastes, and it trends towards deserted Babylon near the Tower of Babel. So we already quoted that. But he says 72 provinces, of which only a few are Christian, serve us. Each has its own king, but all are tributary to us. All right? So this is the vastness of his empire. But again, here is now how he points to his land being in the deserted Babylon. All right? So this is not the Babylon of today, the master Babylon, which is America, but the Babylon of the time of the Edomites and Nebuchadnezzar. In all kinds of riches that are in the world, our greatness abounds and excels. All of us follow after the truth and love one another mutually. No kind of sin reigns here. But what's important here, every year we go to a pilgrimage to the place where lies the body of Daniel the prophet, taking a great host with us to deserted Babylon and those two under arms because of the animals called Tyre and some other serpents called devils. So it seems like it was spiritually kind of a wasteland, because Babylon is prophesied to be a haunt for every doleful creature and evil bird. So this is a double prophecy, but this is the first time that it comes to manifest in the Babylon of the land of Shem, and it'll do it here in the West also. But the point is, it's deserted Babylon where he goes to this pilgrimage. So today they say Daniel is buried at Susa, but others say he's buried closer to Babylon in this account, deserted Babylon. All right, hope that makes sense. Daniel's grave in Mumbai, the true Babylon. Daniel's tomb currently is in Susa, like I said. Now, the prophet Daniel spoke of a 1,260-day period during which the scattering of Israel is accomplished, and after that, the end of time begins and we exodus home. The biblical reference for the river of Babylon in the times of the kingdom of Israel captivity is the prophet Daniel. So this is basically, the river of Babylon is where Daniel sits down by the rivers of Babylon, and he has the vision of the angel of Yahuwah during the Babylon captivity, and this is basically near the Hiddekel or Tigris River. And so in Daniel 10:4 it says, in the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel. Okay, so this is the biblical reference for it. However, some traditions and local beliefs suggest that Daniel's grave is in Mumbai, India, which is referred to as the true Babylon. So Daniel's tomb is supposed to be at Susa, but some traditions say that his grave is actually in Mumbai, India. So the idea of Mumbai as the true Babylon may stem from a major commercial and cultural hub reminiscent of ancient Babylon's significance. In Jubilees, this is cited as Babylon, the land of Shem and Nebuchadnezzar. This connection could also reflect the presence of Israelite communities in India who may have preserved traditions linking their diaspora to biblical narratives. And here's the link if you guys need it. And so this all conforms to the idea of every year we go on a pilgrimage to the place where lies the body of Daniel the prophet, taking great hosts with us to deserted Babylon, because they have to arm themselves because it's desolated. The Sun-Black tribe of Manasseh, the Black Jews of Malabar. B. Ancient cultural and religious practices. The Black Jews of Malabar and the Nasirs maintain practices that align with Israelite customs, such as circumcision, Sabbath observance, and dietary laws. These practices, combined with their oral traditions, provide strong evidence of their Israelite origins. Conclusion: the Sun-Black tribe of Manasseh, the Black Jews of Malabar, and the Nasirs of Afghanistan are all part of the broader narrative of the lost 10 tribes who were not lost but scattered of Israel, being scattered among the nations. Their physical appearance, cultural practices, and genetic markers align with the biblical descriptions of the Israelites as a dark-skinned people, according to Song of Solomon and Lamentations 4:8. The martyrdom of Apostle Thomas in India and the traditions surrounding Daniel's grave in Mumbai further highlight the presence of Israelite communities in the region. These connections, combined with genetic and historical evidence, provide a compelling case for the identification of these groups as the descendants of the ancient Israelites. Here is the Medo-Persian tomb of Daniel. And this is in Susa, the province of Cushites, Iran. And it was first mentioned by Benjamin of Tudela, who visited Western Asia in 1160 and 1163. The Sun-Black tribe of Manasseh in India. So here's another portion from Prester John's letter, and it says, "The place in which our supremacy resides is built after the pattern of the castle built by the Apostle Thomas for the Indian king Gondopharos." So the kingdom of Prester was supremely residing in India. Also, that is where the last Assyrian Amorite Babylon was, so Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. In the book, One Primeval Language's fascinating account of the Sun-Black tribe of Manasseh, the Black Jews of Malabar, and the Nasurs of Afghanistan aligns with the broader narrative of the 10 lost tribes of Israel being scattered among the nations. It's interesting to note that one of the leaders of the Manasseh was rejected from building the second temple. All right. And so in Genesis chapter 48 and 49, this is also where the sons of Jacob are blessed by Jacob, and he chooses first to bless the eldest sons, Joseph, saying Ephraim is a cake unturned. Why? Because they were a mixed multitude. He mixes with the other nations and became a multitude which connects these other nations to Israel. So this is again tying into the Ethiopians being a mixed multitude. And of course, the Samaritans, the good Samaritans, were half Israelite, okay, half northern kingdom mixed in Samaria. During the building of the second temple, the governor of Sumeria under Darius was Sanballat, whose daughter was married to Manasseh. And this is recorded in Nehemiah 13:28. And it recounts that Manasseh mixed with the other nations too. So in Nehemiah it says, "And one of the sons of Jehoiada, son of Elishiab, the high priest, was son-in-law to Shalabat, the Horonite. Therefore, I chased him from me." So when we look at Josephus and other accounts, it says that this is Manasseh. Okay. Now, I want to say here that the Nestorians were tied to Prester John. So Prester John was called the Nestorian. Nestor. Prester. All right. The ancient Christian communities in India that belong to the Syrian church are known as Thomas Christians. They regard the Apostle Thomas as their founder. Some scholars believe this identification may stem from confusion with a later missionary named Thomas who was associated with the Nestorians. However, there is a small group of Christians who are said to have been converted by Thomas in the region along the Malabar coast. So what this is telling us is that there is, again, what I showed you was that Prester John called himself Solomon, he called himself David, he exalted himself to fulfill the vision, and so he might be duplicating the identity of Thomas as well and calling himself a Nestorian. Fam, I cut this off a bit, but referring back to what we said about the black tribes of Manasseh, now we're going to compare it to other tribes who were claiming that they were Jews. All right? The Israelites only by adoption or falsification. This is one primeval language. And what we see here is that, to begin with, the country of the Khazar Tartars, to which the Israelites with certainty are now known to have emigrated, from whence it has been clearly shown they must have passed into Afghanistan and India. It is expressly stated by Ibn Hakul himself, an eyewitness of the fact that there are two distinct branches or castes of the Khazars, the one white and the other black. And what it says in detail here, which it's going to refer to again, there are two classes one of the blackish complexion, such dark hair that you would suppose them to be descendants from the Hindus. The other race, fair complexioned. Now, fair doesn't mean white, but in this context it does. These sell their children, but it is not allowed among the Jews and Christians to sell or make one another slaves. Here's a reference here. From this passage, not only do we learn that one branch of the Khazars were black and another white, but we gather the decisive fact that the Khazar Jews were of the black stock, as plainly follows from the circumstances of the white Khazars, they alone selling their children. After that, the Khazar Jews were of the black stock, as plainly follows from the circumstance of the white Khazars, and they alone selling their children. Consequently, the Jew who did not sell their children were of the black race. But this race, even Hakal tells us, exactly resembled the Hindus. We have not here the Savach of the black Jews of Malabar. All right, so what this is looking like is, we know the Sun Black tribes of Manasseh settled there, but we can see here that they're looking very mixed at this point. And so then Mr. Elphinstone's work supplies a fresh example of the same character and contrast in a case still more nearly in point that one of the tribes of Afghanistan, the Nasrs, all right, so you could take that as nesters. In their person, they are small and black and ugly. We find these Nasrs enjoying the same liberty with most of the other Afghans. The Nasrs are Afghans and therefore, like the black Jews, claim to be Beni Israel and may safely be rested on their own strenuous assertion. So they're saying they are, right? The contrast in the countenance and color is the only difficulty, a difficulty not to be set in balance against the national tradition of any tribe of the Afghan race. And so what it says further down here is that that these other nations were distinct from the true Israelites. But it does mention that there were intermarriages with other races, as claims the book of Nehemiah, that such foreign alliances were not unusual among the Jews after captivity, as Manasseh had become a Tartar horde, seated, as we have seen, in the country of the Khazars, and it may justly be inferred that they indulged in similar latitude, intermarrying with their female slaves or contracting marriages with the black Khazars mentioned in Ibn Hakal. The subject at large and the point in hand receive curious light from the single expression in the Cochin manuscript, whence would appear both that the tribe of Manasseh had become tawny or black, and that this tribe had settled in Malabar and were true ancestors of the black Jews. The expression in question is the tanned or sun-blacked Manasseh. All right, so that's where they get this term, the sun-black tribe of Manasseh. Now, here's a really important note: the Apostle Matthew's martyrdom in Ethiopia. So Coptic Christian texts, which the Europeans call apocryphal, but you have to remember, since the martyrdom of the apostles, these Ethiopians have had these texts far before the church fathers, who claim to have discovered them in the 1700s, and for that reason say that they were created at that time, because that's when they discovered them, which is basically the mindset of the West. Nothing exists before they discover it. But the Coptic Christian texts say Matthew suffered from martyrdom in Ethiopia, killed by a sword wound. According to the tradition, the saint was killed on the orders of a king of Ethiopia. The text opens with a commissioning account with Matthew appointed in Persia, then follows a brief account of his evangelizing efforts in Persia. Matthew in Ethiopia. So I'm showing you here, they're covering this land of the Ethiopians, and this is why they're a more reliable source for the text, because they are also the Samaritans and they're the grafted in. in this Syriac, so Syriac applies Assyrian, which would be Isaurian, which would be Prester John. In a Syriac Coptic tradition, he was martyred in Nadaba, Ethiopia, which some say is Persia. And he preached to the Cushites before his martyrdom, right? So they're being called Cushites. Medo-Persia as Elam. Lost Tribes and the Promised Land says, John tells us that his place is in Susa, the ancient capital of Persia, but this also implied proximity to Ethiopia in the vague geographical imagination of medieval Europe. So as I've already said before. So again, and this is, we're going to get more specific to the Persians, the Medo-Persians, because they are half Shemitic. Because we know Madai in the Book of Jubilees asked for land of Arphaxad, son of Shem, because his wife was a Shemite. And so that's why the Medo-Persians dwell there to this day. All right? So this is the grafting in of the Sumeritans, who are known as Ethiopians. So many different names for these people as they do this journey of grafting in. Okay. So again, I mentioned before, the palace of our supremacy is built after the pattern of the castle built by the Apostle Thomas for Indian King Gondopharos. Why am I saying this? Thomas was in the region of Gondopharos, as was Prester's kingdom. Gondopharos, we see here, this is a reference in Wikipedia, was the founder of the Indo-Persian kingdom, and its most prominent ruling from 19 to 46. He was probably belonged to a line of local princes that governed the Persian province of Drangangia since its disruption by the Indo-Scythians. All right, so we have Gondophares. Phares is usually implying Hamitic, right? Pharaohs. Gondophares was in the lineage of the Ethiopian king. He was Indo-Scythian. So this is Indo-European. The Scythians are Japheth. The Indos are like usually the Cushites, sometimes the Shemites, or both. So this is the mixed multitude again, all right? But this is the Japhetic mix manifest in Gondopharos, the Indo-European mix. So History of Ethiopia and Nubia and Assyria by Wallace Budge. According to the History of Ethiopia, Nubia, and Abyssinia, it seems certain that classical historians and geographers called the whole region from India to Egypt, both countries inclusive, by the name of Ethiopia, and in consequence they regarded all dark-skinned people and black people who inhabited it as Ethiopians. Mention is made of Eastern and Western Ethiopians, and it is probable that the Easterners were Asiatic and the Westerners were Africans. In the present work, which I have called A History of Ethiopia, I have made no attempt to describe the history of that large portion of the earth's surface which the Greeks called Ethiopia, but only of that comparatively small section of it which is today named both by large numbers of Orientals and by Europeans generally Abyssinia, and also of the country of Cush, which is known as Nubia. So again, they're all agreeing. This Wallace Budge, which would be probably British, and the Greeks and the Orientals. Now the Orientals, that's the Middle East. So those aren't Chinese people. Those are Ethiopians and Africans and Shemites. They're all saying that that Abyssinia and Ethiopia and Cush and Nubia are basically all the same land, all the same thing. So Africa all the way out to India. And of course, he doesn't mention South America, but he calls the Westerners Africans, but those would really be the Southerners. All right, continuing with History of Ethiopia, Nubia, and Abyssinia by Wallace Budge. And this is now, we're returning to the idea of the Ishmaelites, right? So Abyssinia is a Europeanized form of Habash or Habish or Habsha, which is the name of the Arab tribe from Yaman who invaded the country some centuries before the Christian era. And for nearly 2,000 years, Orientals have called the country by the name of its ancient invaders. Abyssinians of all classes speak of their country as Ethiopia and dislike the Arabic name Habash. Habash, which would mean, anyway, every king of Abyssinia from the time of Tasfa, Ayanus, Yakono, Amalek, until today has been proud to adopt as his chief the NEGUZ, Ethiopia. In other words, king of the Ethiopians. So NEGUZ, again, is meaning captain in Hebrew, or prince, okay? And notice how it's the Amalekites, descendants of Esau, who took over the rulership. So this is, again, a mixed multitude and identity theft process. It is not certain who first gave the name of Ethiopia to Abyssinia, but it is clear that the Syrian monks who translated the Greek Bible into NEGUZ identified Cush or Nubia with Abyssinia and generally translated the name of Cush by Ethiopia. All right? So we see that it's the Assyrians, the Esauians, and other Shemites who translated the Bible into Ga'azi. Now that's not Amharic, that's Ga'az. All right? So again, proving furthermore the extent of the land that included Africa, that it included India, that it included Elam. It seems that classical historians and geographers called the whole region of India, the whole region from India to Egypt, both countries inclusive, by the name Ethiopia, and in consequence they regarded all the dark-skinned black peoples who inhabited it as Ethiopians. Mention is made of Eastern and Western Ethiopians, and it is probable that the Easterners were Asiatics and the Westerners Africans. Just affirming this again, we already read it. In the present work, which I have titled A History of Ethiopia, I have made no attempt to describe the history of the large portion of the Earth's surface, which the Greeks called Ethiopia. All right, so here is Edomite Herodians' representation of the earth in 430 BC. And so this is, what you see here is Ethiopia and Africa. This is Arabia here. Then we have Susa, which would be Medo-Persia. Then we have Elam, right? Elam would be between the Euphrates, where it drops off into the Indian Ocean, and the Tigris or Hiddekel when it drops off into the Indian Ocean. It says Eastern Ethiopians, all right? Again, they're confusing the terms. But this would be Elam. Elam was between these two regions, beyond the Euphrates, all right? And what do we have beyond this? Way up into Tartaria, we have East Sidonians. This is what I mean. The term Sidonians was also applied to these mixed multitudes. All right? And so they eventually all interlope. Now we know that there was among the Tudors a Mary of Guise, all right? And Gizerite is the South Semitic language. Yet we have here things like Jerusalem, so we can see the scattering of Israel, right? We also see here Candace. There was a Queen Candace, all right? We see Ben-Gala, so the sons of Israel on their Gala. Gala means Gala. Gala means their walk, their scattering, all right? The scattering of the sons, all right? And of course we have here the Guzerite. And so it says NEGUZ is a South Semitic language. The language originates from what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea. Today, NEGUZ is used as the main liturgical language of the Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo Church, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. And this is the Ethiopian Catholic Church. All right? Eritrean Catholic Church and the Beta Israel Jewish community. All right? So we see them in these regions. And look, extra India and intra India. All right? We see Guzarite again here. Gaaz. So we see that this is Elam. This is Elam. Queen Candace. So we can see that the scattering was occurring just as it says regarding the Black Jews of Malabar. McClintock's Bible Dictionary says, from policy or conviction, Alexander the Great delighted to represent himself as chosen by destiny for the great act which he achieved. The siege of Tyre arose professedly from a religious motive. The battle of Esau was preceded by the visit to Gordium, the invasion of Persia by the pilgrimage to the temple of Ammon. All right, so it's just saying that he went to these various places to worship his false gods before he invaded Persia. All right? Persia. And I'm not going to show you the temple of Ammon, but I'm just showing you he was in Persia. All right? He was said to rule the world. When these people are talking about ruling the world, they mean the whole planet. And so here we have the image in Daniel 8 of the vision of Medo-Persia and Greece and Alexander the Great, Alexander the Greek. We read about him in Daniel 8's vision. And he is basically the tip of the spear. He is the first king of the West to come over from North America, from the lands of Japheth and Ham, what they call Canada and America today. And it is through him that the four beasts come through. So it's a modern misconception that Greece is the leopard. Greece is the goat. It's not a repeating prophecy when we get to the four beasts. Greece, this goat with one horn that is coming forwards from the west, and literally he is flying. We see, it says, and I saw a ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. So this is the Medes and the Persians. This is the mix of Shem and Japheth kingdom that Cyrus came out of, who built the second temple. And then it says, and I was considering, and behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between the eyes. So he's coming over from the west because he has to float across the waters. Now, I believe they used airships in the past in addition to water ships, okay? But he definitely is coming across great waters, just like the lion that represents Rome when it comes. It has the wings of an eagle, and it flies across from the west and lands in the beautiful land. And this is why they're pictured as floating or flying, because they have to cross water, all right? And we'll get into the four beasts probably in part 4. And then Daniel 8:2 says, and the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So that is Alexander the Great. Because remember, 4 kings come out of him. So that's the 4 beasts. So Daniel 8:22 to confirm. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, and 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And in the latter time of the kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding, dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not in his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and he shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and holy people. So it says, and practice, that means he's using witchcraft. And through his policy, so remember his police, just like Egypt had police overseers, officers, he has police. He shall cause craft to prosper. See, the witchcraft is craft. In his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart. And by peace shall he destroy many. And he shall also stand up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken without hand. So it is only Yahushua HaMashiach in his coming who will destroy the king of the West. But this is how we know that it is in the king of the West, the king of, Egypt and Canada, and the kings that come out of him. And this includes Alexander the Greek conquering Medo-Persia to become part of the Grecian Empire is what I mean. I'm going to give you the ram's identity because people confuse the nations according to Daniel, and I have done it myself. So ram's identity, Daniel 8:20. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Medo-Persia. Why? Because they're mixed. One horn is stronger and bigger because that is Madai, who mixed with Arphaxad. All right? And the other horn is smaller because that's the Persians. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So there's going to be 4 other kings, but the first is Alexander. And the first of the 4 kings is Rome. The third is Prester John. But that's another video. All right, so more on Alexander the Greek. Alexander the Macedonian. Alexander III of Macedonia. Most commonly known as Alexander the Great, he was the king of the great ancient Greek kingdom of Macedon. He succeeded his father Philip II to the throne in 336 BC at the age of 20 and spent most of his ruling years conducting a lengthy military campaign throughout Western Asia, Central Asia, and South Asia and Egypt. And by the age of 30, he had created one of the largest empires in history, stretching from Greece to northwestern India. Now, they named a lot of different lands: South Asia, Asia, Central Asia. There are all kinds of Asias in there. So Sidonia is often referring to the Azores, the Atlantis, those kinds of areas. Alexander of Macedon, the Macedonian, he had a relationship with the Ethiopian woman. He had a relationship with an Ethiopian woman. Okay? Now, I want to mention Sidonia. The Sidonians were a Shemitic-speaking Canaanite tribe occupying these areas of Alexander the Macedonian and creating a patchwork of city-states on their own. Remember, I already showed you that map of the Sidonia. The Phoenicians, more Canaanites, also occupied this region eventually, founding their own mighty seaborne trading empire. This is Macedonia we're talking about, okay? Inhabited from about 4000 BC and even earlier, I don't know. The name Sidon means fishery, and this is one of the oldest Canaanite or Phoenician cities. Around 722, 676 BC, the Assyrian assumption of dominance over Phoenician in 738 is clearly not enough to fully conquer the land. And the last king of Hayawa, so notice how they use a similar name to Yahuwah, right? Hayawa. Ahaya, right? Hayawa, but this is a corruption of his name, right? Set apart Yahuwah. Throws off the shackles of the Assyrian domination, which triggers an Assyrian invasion Hayaha was defeated, although the dates of this event is uncertain and may even take place at the very start of the reign of Sargon. However, in 573 BC, Babylonia quickly establishes its own control over Phoenicia. Prester John, again, Lost Tribes of the Promised Land, says that Alexander had a relationship with an Ethiopian woman, and this is cited in Alexander Legends of the Middle Ages. And it says, didn't we just see Queen Candace on the map? Alexander Legends of the Ages is a philosophical encounter with the Gymnosophists of India, a vaguely erotic encounter with Queen Candace of Ethiopia. So we saw her on the map there. The encounter with Queen Candace, a very small novel in itself, is as much a brief for the virtues of Ethiopia as Heliodorus's novel was. When Alexander travels through its countryside to meet the queen, he sees marvels suggestive of the latter realms of Prester John, crystal-bearing mountains, which reach as high as the clouds of heavens, and the deep caves with rocky descents, which an Ethiopian prince describes as the dwelling place of the gods. When Candace first appears to Alexander, she is dazzling in her royal crown, reveling in her very great height and godly face. Now, it's important to understand, they talk about the height of these crystal mountains. So the highest mountains in the world are where the ark landed, right? And they went down into the land of Shem from there. So this would be in the region of Elam and Babylon, the land of the Edomites and Nebuchadnezzar, because this is where the crystal-bearing mountains, which reach the clouds of heaven and have deep caves, is. All right, that's telling you geographically where it is. When Candace first appears to Alexander, she is dazzling in her royal crown, revealing her very great height and her godly face. And the great height is a standard element in the descriptions of the Ethiopian in antiquity. The godly face is also not new. But here the author stops short of the color with the Heliordian evasiveness. In fact, color is mentioned only once in the entire story. In a letter written to the Macedonian before he and she have met, the queen warns, "And do not be mistaken about our color, for in our souls we are lighter than the white men amongst you." So we know the Ethiopian woman is brown. All right. And judging from the nose knocked off Alexander's statue, he might be too. History of Ethiopia and Nubia. Philip and the eunuch in Acts 8 and 27. The Ethiopian Candace's treasurer is baptized in the 1st century AD before the commission of Peter or Paul to be apostles to the Gentiles, because these are the Samaritans. So the Ethiopian, he is baptized because he's already reading the word. All right. This is the first Gentile convert. And this, he also precedes Ezana's 4th century conversion, because there is a account of an Edomite, Ezana, being converted in the 4th century. So the Westerners try to lie and say, oh no, the Ethiopians were converted in the 4th century. But no, when Philip converted the Ethiopian eunuch, that was the beginning. When Thomas and Matthew also went into that region, they were also converted. All right? Way too much evidence. And again, I want to say to you regarding the Greek and the Greek authority on scripture, why would the word of Yah, the heavenly language of creation, which is what Jubilees says Hebrew is, why would the word of Yah, Yahushua HaMashiach, come in speaking the profane Greek language? All right? So if we just don't want to continue to walk in this mythology. I mean this really humbly. I was just like, I never said anything, and I suppose I was silenced on the topic for a reason, because Yah didn't want me to hear any lies. But as I read scripture, there was nothing about the Greeks going on except for the Greek captivity. And the reason why Jubilees was omitted is because it clearly explains where the true lands are for Shem, Ham, and Japheth, which is problematic for the current rulers of the world right now. It explains the calendar. It explains the zero shadow noon, which will locate true Jerusalem. All of these things is what that book written by Moses explains. And so this is one of the reasons for the cover-up. So this is the ascendancy of the kings from the Solomonic line, beginning with Menelek, son of Sheba. We're not going to go too much into this, but this is just a start. And this is very important because there was the first Menelek, which was the traditional founder of the Solomonic line. And there were 98 kings total before him, all right? But after him, there were a multitude of them. So these are the descendants of Sheba, all right? These are the descendants of Sheba after Abraham, after Isaac, after Jacob, all the way from Solomon forwards to Menelek, all right? Solomon forwards to Menelek. So we land on Menelek all the way up to between 9 and 306 AD. And this is around the time that Philip converted the Ethiopian eunuch. Okay? And then we have a different line, which we call the Christian era, from the 400s, which is the time of Esau. This is the time when his Prester John line begins to take over the Ethiopian bloodlines, okay, and their rulership of the kingdom. Acts of Matthew and Acts of Matthew, cities of the priests, are the Ethiopic texts that discuss Matthew being martyred in Ethiopia. I say this, I mention this, because it says this is the only published portion of the Coptic text, and it opens with a commissioning account with Matthew appointed Nain or Nabatean in Persia. Then follows a brief account of what follows in the Arabic and Ethiopic. These two versions begin with a short history of the apostles' evangelizing efforts in Persia, as in the Bavarian Apostolorum, so the Greeks even, and the Greek Acts of Matthew, notice that's the Greek. Mentioned also is that Matthew wrote his gospel in Hebrew while in Jerusalem. The scriptures are written in Hebrew. As I said, Yahusha would not, the very word himself would come in the language of creation, not a confounded language from Babel. People do not speak the language of their captor in their own land generally. They may speak both languages, but the language of the good news would never be in a confounded language, family. It just breaks my heart. It just really hurts me to hear people say that. It's just such a sin against the very word of Yah, who is Yahusha, the Hebrew language. Pause to read this. It's kind of messy, but account of Ezana's conversion in the early 4th century. In those days, Ethiopia was governed by the kingdom of Aksum, ruling from their capital Aksum on the Tigray Plateau. The Aksumite kingdom controlled the upper reaches of the Nile, dominating trade in the southern sea. At one point, their dominion even encompassed modern-day Yemen. Culturally, the Aksumites were akin to the Nabateans. Naba means prophet in Hebrew. And the symbols and names associated with their gods reflect the influences of Arabia. So the Arabians, those are the Ishmaelites, but they're also the Edomites. The Aksumites were thus heirs of a rich culture, constituting a proud and powerful force in Eastern Africa. Again, it refers to Apostle Thomas being martyred. In the region of the Ethiopians in 70 AD, so Medo-Persia. All right? But here we can see a connection with the Edomites in Egypt, as they did rule Egypt as Cairo, and they ruled Alexandria. All right? So this is where they say their conversion took place. This is really the conversion of the Edomites. All right? I don't mean as them mixed in with the Romans, because they did mix in with the Romans, but them exclusively. I guess it would have been one of their tribes. All right, so once again, I take you back to this map. There's Candia and Jerusalem. So this is the scattering of the tribes. Bengala, sons of the tribes on their walk, on their scattering walk. And the Guzarites, Gaazi. All right, and intra-India and extra-India. All right, just to reinforce this, and Guzarite as a Semitic language. And that they translated in the Guzarite, I believe, at the time of the Edomites. This is really what I think. But I could be wrong. That's just my theory. Because the Ethiopians will tell you their language is Amharic. All right, and here's Esau's lineage. And Amalek, Duke Amalek, is in his lineage from Basemath. All right? Basemath, the Canaanite wife of Esau. All right? So the dukes of Amalek took over the identity. All right, so here's more evidence of the realm beyond darkness. All right, so the true Western conquest of those lands, evidence of Prester John being in the West, all right, the Southwest. In 775 AD, Nehemiah Theodoric conquered the American empire of Kalas, California, where the Gihon surrounds. Kalas was ruled by Silvanus Toltecus, and he was called Solomon the Builder, I guess, the hereditary ruler of this former Jewish-ruled Roman colony. So it was a Roman colony. This is what I mean, family. Why? Rome was above them. Rome is here in the West. Kalas was founded in the 1st century by the Babylonian exilarch named Sylvanus Ogum, Sylvanus Brabo, Solomon the second Babylonian exilarch, Nasi of Mara, ruler of the Sumer in Britain. So you see this, these are Augeans. This is again the mixed multitude. This is Sylvanus Toltecus. So these are the Shemites. And then it's Nehemiah Theodoric conquered Kalas. And Kalas had been ruled by the Romans, who had set up a Jewish Roman colony there. All right, so this is all the way in the West, where when you're hearing Theodorus, you're talking about the Tudors, you're talking about the Ethiopians, and I believe, among them all and overarching them is Prester John. He was a soldier and ancestor of the Swan Knights. He also had a fleet of trading vessels known as the ships of Solomon, or swan boats. And that's why when we go to Daniel chapter 11, it says that Esau Edom would exalt himself to fulfill the vision, but he would fall, because he's calling himself Solomon, Prester John. He even calls himself David. So he's exalting himself to try to fulfill the vision of the kingdom of heaven. And so it just says that these are swan-shaped boats, and the swan is a symbol of Hasatan, actually. After the defeat of Sylvanus Toltecus, the members of that royal family were sent back to Europe, and they were under the protection of Nehemiah Theodorus and his family. All right, so Prester John was ruling, and we'll see in the next episode, in Britain and Western Europe. All right, the Tudors. Legends of Dun and Aghir are based on the activities of the family descending from Duan and Tigon Aghir and Sylvanus Brabo. So I just want you to see the Augeans, Og of Bashan, These are the Canaanitish lines, all right, who also mixed in with the Khan of Japheth. So mixed multitude again. When we head back to the west, what is said in the book Ancient America is, over and against Africa lies a great island, a vast ocean, many days from Libya westward. The soil is very fruitful. A great part of it is mountainous, but much likewise champagne, which is the most sweet and pleasant part, for it is watered by several navigable streams, beautiful, many gardens of pleasure planted with diverse sorts of trees and an abundance of orchards. The towns were adorned with stately buildings and banqueting houses, pleasantly situated in their gardens and orchards. Okay, page 162, Diodorus Siculus. And again, in ancient America, we see that the people known as the Phoenicians were preeminent as colonizing navigators of antiquity. All right? The early Greeks called them Ethiopians, not meaning black men or Africans, and said they went everywhere establishing their colonies and their commerce in all the coast regions, from the extreme east to the extreme west, History has knowledge of only a few of their latter communities, the Sabaeans of southern Arabia. All right, so I believe possibly the Ishmaelites, the Phoenicians, this race from the beginning of its development. It is not difficult to believe that the communities of the Phoenicians or Ethiopian race were established all around the Mediterranean, even beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, in ages quite as old as Egypt or Chaldea. They had communication with America before Tyre or Sidon was built. Why did the ancients say so much of a great Samaritan continent beyond the Atlantic if nobody in prehistoric ages had ever seen that continent? It was there, as they said, as we know, but whence came their knowledge of it, and such knowledge as led them to describe it as larger than Asia, meaning Asia Minor, Europe, and Libya altogether. So they're talking about America. All right? And so further evidence, everybody knew about these places. They just started to hide it from the masses. This is the work of the fallen angels in Esau, Edom, the end of the world. So natural and moral history of the Indies has this to say about the burning zone. All right, so it's talking about the Antarctic. And what it says is that it's talking about the burning zone, which is a place where there's a lot of heat, but they also say there's a lot of humidity and winds. So they're just debating weather stuff in relation to these zones. But this helps us to define the other Ethiopia. So it says regarding, the temperatures, but this is not to hinder the exceptions which nature hath given to this rule, making some regions of the burning zone extremely dry, which is reported of Ethiopia, and we have seen it in a great part of Peru, where all that land or coast, which they call Illinois, wants to rain, yea, land waters, except some valleys where rivers fall from the mountains. The rest is sandy and barren soil, where you shall hardly find any springs, but some deep wells. So they're calling it Illinois. All right, and then we go on to page 90. The burning zone in some parts is very temperate, as in Quinto, and on the coast plains of Peru. In some parts, very cold, as at Potosi, and in some very hot, as in Ethiopia, Brazil, and Moluccas, which is Indonesia. Plato places his renowned Atlas Island under the burning zone. Then he saith, certain seasons of the year it hath the sun for zenith, and yet it was very temperate, fruitful, and rich. Under the burning zone. So this is just showing you that Ethiopia is considered to also be in this region. Then page 99 says, just to triple confirm, there are many of these villages and towns in Brazil, Ethiopia, and Paraguay, even as everyone knoweth, and that which is more considerable. We see these differences not only on land, but also on the sea. So talking about temperate zones, temperature, and villages, but I'm just showing you that there was an Ethiopia over here. And so, Illustrations of America discusses the fact that the most eminent Greek philosopher speaks of the grand division of the world beyond the ocean. Alien and his Verte Historiae Book 3, Chapter 18, cites Theopompus, an eminent Greek historian born about 300 years BC, as stating that the Meropians inhabit the large continent beyond the ocean, in comparison with which the known world was but an island. Aristotle says in chapters 84 and 83, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, they say that an inhabited island was discovered by the Carthaginians, which abounded in forests and navigable rivers, and days' sail, and fruits of all kinds distant from the continent, many days' sail, while the Carthaginians were engaged in making voyages to this land, and some had even settled there on the account of the fertility of the soil. The Senate decreed that no one thereafter, under penalty of death, should enjoy thither. I want you to understand that this is Prester John's rule. Everyone was hiding out in the west, because you're going to notice it's the Phoenicians, it's the Carthaginians, it's this mixed multitude, and Canaan is among them, and Moab and everything. So they're hiding the west till the great reset, and Prester John is ruling. No one thereafter, under penalty of death, should enjoy thither. Aristotle was born 384 years before Christ. Diodorus of Sicily, who lived in the century preceding the Christian era, says in his book 3 that it was the Phoenicians instead of the Carthaginians who cast upon a most fertile island opposite Africa, where the climate was that of perpetual spring, and that the land was the proper habitation for gods rather than men. He speaks of the continent, however, at length and with great detail, enumerating its fertile valleys and navigable rivers, its rich and abundant fruits and supply of game, its valuable forests, and its genial climate. Pliny quotes Statius Sebosus in his volume 2, page 106, Bonn, as saying that the two Hesperides are 42 days from the coasts of Africa. Now, this was about the length of the journey of Paul from Jerusalem to Rome, when you read it in Acts. So he actually goes to Rome over in North America, just FYI. And so when we look at the Chata nation, which is said to be in this region here, what they call Louisiana and Florida, etc., near Virginia, I want you to think about this Ethiopia including this area. Why? Why do I say that? Because when we consider the Guinea going over here, I believe it also goes into Virginia or Virginia. Guinea. All right, Virginia. Why do I say that? I say that because there's various names that we can align with Chata. As I've said, Chata, Cathay, Cutha, Cush, Carthaginians. So Chata Ghanaians, because there is a Ghana off the coast here, right? Kata Ghanaians, Carthaginians, or Virginians in Virginia. So ancient Carthage was a Punic city, and it was an ancient Semitic city. an ancient Semitic civilization based in North Africa, initially a settlement in the present-day Tunisia. It later became a city-state and an empire founded by the Phoenicians in the 9th century BC. Carthage reached its height in 4th century BC, one of the largest metropolises in the world. It was the center of the Carthaginian Empire. But you want to know and remember, I'm not sure if you guys can see this, family, but it was removed by Alexander the Great when he went into the Mediterranean to conquer. But you must keep in mind that Alexander the Great was from the west also. Greece was in the west. As I've shown you many of the pictures, the old Tartarian pictures show you Greece and Rome really being in the west. And that's why the lion, as I said, also has to fly over into Africa in order to take over Jerusalem. And so he drove them out of the land of Israel, as was prophesied. All right. Remember, these are the Phoenicians. They were sailing on boats and trading everywhere. They were, running in Satan's marine kingdom. But this is why you can have the Carthaginians, the Chatavirginians, the Chataginians. All right. And when you read the book of Jasher, it talks all about Carthage and the disagreements the Carthaginians had with the Japhethites and their marriages with their wives, etc. And then also during the captivity of Israel to Egypt, how one of Edom's sons, Zipho, mixed in at that time with the Romans, with the Iroquois, the Iraqis, the true Romans. We'll go talk about that in the next episode. Chief war horse, she is an Assyrian. She is of the Chata nation, or the Kutha, but you see she has kinky hair because the Assyrians mixed in with the Cushites and with the Canaanite nations. And so when she is having her discussions about her family and lineage, you see a black man here, you see a half black girl here, you see an Indian looking woman here, you see a sort of Asian Indian mix, these two people actually. You see somebody East Indian, Cushite looking up here, and you see Native American here. She's claiming all of these people as her people. These are the Phoenicians, these are the Carthaginians, these are the mixed multitude. These are really the enemies of Israel. And she's having this very intense discussion in this one video she does, Chief Warhorse, with this guy Tom Acklin, and he is the creator of the Bayou Lacombe Choctaw, or the band of the Mississippi Choctaw. So again, Choctaw. So Kutha, Cush, Cathay, Catholic, Choctaw, Carthage. These are all renditions of the same name, the Cushites. And so he's a band of the Mississippi Choctaw and various Oklahoma nations. And she gets into this dispute about them, describing all of her lands. And he tells her, she's sitting there saying people don't want the truth, and he's agreeing with her. But it may be very possible, and they wind up kind of fighting. He's never back on the show again because he's just not acknowledging the white history. But in truth, he has a legitimate claim to being a Native American, because he is an Amorite. I've shown you guys in many videos, especially on the Federal Reserve, these are the Tamarica Indians, the Amorite Indians, who established the Federal Reserve in this, the last hour of the beast, with the Canaanites ruling from Western, Europe, and Britain and the United States. This has all been Canaanite rule for the hour of the beast, the last 70 years of the beast. And so we know Canaan stole Shem's lot. According to Jubilee 8 and 14, Shem and his portions extends along the Great Sea and extends in a straight line till it reaches the west of the tongue towards the south. And this same is the tongue of the Egyptian Sea. Now, this is talking about the Rubus Negro central area up north, right above the Atlantic Ocean. And there is a tongue on that land around the Rubus Negro that is the tongue of the Egyptian Sea. So basically, the Egyptian Sea, the Ethiopic Sea, the Atlantic Sea are all names for the ocean between Africa and North America. All right? Jubilees 10:9 says, Canaan saw the land of Lebanon to the river of Egypt, take that as Jordan, that it was very good, and he went not into his own land of his inheritance to the west, that is, to the sea, and he dwelt in the land of Lebanon, eastward and westward of the border of Jordan, and from the border of the sea. All right? So we see here the Amorite mountains. We see the Horite mountains listed on this ancient map I show you guys all the time. This is like the Zambezi River where the Nile comes out of. And you see they settled there. But they were originally from America. And this is, see, a lot of people have forgotten who they are, but he probably knows very well who he is. This man who was speaking with Chief Warhorse. All right? So Canaan stole this land, and people continue to make the mistake of calling it the land of Canaan, not understanding the lots of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, which is a really dire error that, you know, nobody searching out these genealogies needs to make at this point in time. So for those of you who don't know, you know, just keep this in mind and, you know, make corrections as you go through your teaching. And so again, Chief Warhorse. Carthagena. All right, so Virginia, Chata, Carthagena, Chata, Virginia. And we see again that the Gihon River from Guyana to Guyana, it would actually match up somewhere around here. It would go up into Virginia. It would go around the Gulf of Mexico and then come back down here into the Amazon, etc. And the lower portions of it here, or of the Pishon, if you want to call it, would go into here. And so that is surrounding the whole land of Cush. Please note, there is a Cholula in Mexico. All right? I can't really pronounce that. I haven't practiced it, but this is a model of the Cholula temple in Mexico, which is the largest known pyramid in the world. It goes even further underground. All right, and so this is again confirming South America as another Ethiopia or Kutha, Chata, etc. So why am I saying this? Lost tribes, a myth. So Evelet can translate as Havilah, and many confuse this with the river of Pishon. But there are 2 or 3 Western regions called Havilah, says Strong's Concordance. And Easton's Bible Dictionary, it means the land of gold. But there are many gold regions in the land of Shem. Havilah, probably from Strong's H2342, means circular, the name of 2 or 3 Eastern regions. So there we have Medo-Persia, we have Elam, Assyria, and Aram's land. So Assyria and Aram's land kind of switched and mushed together. It is uncertain whether the tribe gave its name to this region or derived its name from it, and whether it was originally a Cushite. So now when we're talking about Cushites, we're talking about Ethiopians. Or whether there were both a Cushite and Joktanite Havilah. Some identify this Havilah with one of the following, but others take it to be Kawala on the Caspian Sea, whence that sea itself is said to have derived from the Russian name Chawalinskoy, more of the Sea of Kawala, and others suppose it a general name for India and would be identified with the Ganges or even the Indus. All right? So Havilah, Chawala, Chatala, Kata, Kusha. So all this section here is me. It is clear the place where the Cushites and Shemites meet. East meets west where there is gold, and this could be South America or the Middle East, the only 2 places where the Cushites, Ham, and the Shemites, Joktan, intersect. And Ishmael was dwelling close to Abraham, but near the Assyrians in Arabia. To add to this, the descendants of Ishmael dwelt in Arabia next to Elam, where I showed you in that other map, and they are called the Carmanians, or the dragons of Arabia. And these are the original Arabs. not the white ones of today who descend from Japheth. Once again, Daniel 11 and 14 says, also the spoilers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, and they shall fail, says the Septuagint. So it is Edom who spoiled Jacob, all right? And so again, Prester John seeks to change times and seasons, timelines and seasons. He makes Solomon and Dawid a title. So family, it is very clear from all of this that our understanding of the globe and even the lands of Israel is not at all what the actual Bible says or what has been understood over time, except for these last 70 years of the beast, of the Queen of England and the Canaanites ruling the world. And so we're going to continue this series, and we're going to break it down more into people groups in the next episode so we can understand how everybody kind of mixed in, and we can begin to locate the transition of the Presters all the way up from Prester John of the Assyrian Edomites to Prester Pope Khan. All right? So thanks so much for watching, family. May Yah bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine on you. May he be gracious, lift the light of his countenance, and give you shalom. So thank you for your prayers and donations, family. They mean so much to me, and thank you for showing up and participating. And so next episode, we'll go into the genealogies of the Confederacy and the Prester Pope Khan and the four beasts. Remember, no matter what your seed is, you can accept the seed of Yahushua HaMashiach and choose to leave your father's house. And it is no coincidence that Trump is saying to everyone whom he is evicting, this is not your father's house. So he's sending people home. But Yahushua HaMashiach and Yahuwah Elohim have a house of prayer for all nations. Shalom. Be sure to go to intoalltruth.net to pick up the Moedim Appointed Times calendar, as well as Chaya Eat Life and Fast, the Hebraic Lifestyle and Cookbook. It's also a health book to help you with your natural health the Hebraic way, according to the ways taught to Noah. Arise up, O Yahweh, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those that hate you flee from before you. Second Exodus. Suva Yahuwah Rev Allah Yasharel. Return, O Yahuwah, to the countless thousands of Yasharel.